Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I'm going to read a little Richard Wilbur to you, not from his poetry, but rather from one of his essays, a real marvelous thing about poetic influence. I don't recall the exact title of it, but he has a couple of books of collected prose pieces, and you will find it in one of those. I had a blog and would put things up there associated to what I was reading at the time. This was one of them. And then later on, when I was trying to put together a book of prose essays, well, I needed a lot of filler, so I just took blog posts and put them up. I suppose I should go like that, really. So I'll just read you a little bit of what I wrote to set the tone for the quotation of Wilbur. Wilbur begins with a description of a party at which every one of a bunch of artists told the story of what turned them each onto his or her respective art. And it was always seeing a painting or hearing Bach played on the organ, etc. Never, in any case, the turmoil of first love, the song of the thrush, or the Bay of Naples. I mentioned I can't quite say that my experience corroborates that. But be that as it may, let's go into what Wilbur had to say. All of these open admissions of poetic indebtedness are attractive and useful. They remind us that art is ultimately a loose collective enterprise, and they tell us something of the particular writer by exposing his affinities. Still, they must not be taken too simple-mindedly. It is not of much interest to assign Ezra Pound to something called the Whitman tradition and let it go at that. Pound's poem of capitulating praise should move its commentator to discern what in Whitman Pound could actually use, what was not to his purpose, and what he still could not stand. Literary historians, in their taxonomic fury, often talk as if the process of influence were like decalcomania, as if writers simply copied each other's productions, as Macy's might match Gimbel's in item and price. But such is not the case, and that character in Borges who was so influenced by Cervantes as to write Don Quixote is fictitious. To be sure, there are people other than scribes, plagiarists, and forgers who copy art or try to. They are not, in the full sense, artists, and they cannot help it. Think of those who have aped the spare and additive Hemingway sentence without having the peculiarly resigned sense of life that required it, or those who, with no apparent sense of its function, have copied that long Faulkner sentence, which is so suitable for conveying simultaneities of awareness and action. And what of all those instant Welshmen of 20 years ago who dropped everything and wrote in the distinctive rhapsodic manner of Dylan Thomas? We cannot remember their names, and the reason we cannot is that Wordsworth was right. Art must grow naturally, like a plant, from its own roots and in its own soil and climate. A plant may be pruned or trained or grafted to advantage, but only within the limits of its own nature. The saddest epitaph I have ever heard was spoken by Robert Frost. He said of another writer, "He wanted to be me." So I stumbled a little there. The spare and additive Hemingway sentence, I almost wasn't sure if it was addictive Hemingway sentence. I just in this one page, I found multiple typos. Sadly, that's what happens when you put books up at lulu.com. Oh, go on. I don't know. I don't think this follows directly upon that. Poets do not always go about being influenced in the way in which critics and scholars would have them do. Critics and scholars, if I may be flippant about them for a moment, like literature to be organized sensibly in schools and streams. On the one hand, the sons of Ben, on the other, the Spencerians. They think it convenient for writers to be explainable by reference to immediate forerunners and major contemporaries. How wistfully scholars speak of the possibility that the paths of Milton and Donne may have crossed when Milton was an adolescent student at St. Paul's and Donne was dean of the cathedral. But if it happened, it brought nothing about, and Milton went stubbornly on to elect such outlandish influences as Cardinal Bembo. It is always that way with the best poets. They do not travel in gangs, and they make surprising decisions as to who shall teach them. Not all our hindsight can make it seem predictable that Ezra Pound in such and such a year should have turned to Gautier for inspiration. So I really enjoyed that because that holds true with my own experience. I've talked a lot about the influence Claude McKay has had on my poetry. I often recommend this edition of McKay, the selected poetry. Now, when this was originally published, it had an introduction by somebody. I keep thinking it's somebody surnamed Dewey, but it was really a pathetic thing. And by the time they came to reprint this, they shifted a biographical note by Max Eastman to the very front, and then they got rid of the introduction. And so when I first encountered McKay, well, I first read him in an anthology, but when I first got this book and began to learn about McKay, I wrote a poem in my first book of sonnets about Max Eastman's introduction, as I called it. And that introduction, at some point in my career as a booktuber, I read that introduction, and if I can find it, I will put a link to that in the description box. So I still hold to my original opinion that this is the best source for encountering McKay's poetry. Some time ago, maybe 25 years ago, a complete edition of McKay's poetry was published, and I was so super excited to hear that it was coming out. I waited for it with bated breath, and when it came out, I bought it brand new. I should see what year it was. And I was just so disgusted by the book. Everything in the book was just shitty. It was poorly laid out. It was the critical apparatus was garbage and blah blah blah. And so I returned the book, something I have regretted since. But it was a time in my life when I didn't have ready cash, and the original price was quite a bit. The price has not really gone down, but I recently decided that I should buy it again. So it looks like the first paperback was 2008, but it's copyright 2004. So I'm going to guess it's 20 years old, 20 years ago that happened. So I repurchased it. It came a couple of days ago, and I've reacquainted myself with it, and I don't particularly care for the illustration and why they put it on the spine. I'm very happy though, however, to have it as a paperback instead of as the big hardbound. But as far as the layout, I have no qualms with it. The layout on the page seems very good. Seems excellent, in fact. So I was obviously motivated by some kind of prejudice. What really disturbed me about the book is that most of the poetry is not really that good. It turns out whoever selected this volume picked out the absolute best of McKay. It's pretty much a flawless work, and almost none of the rest from this book is anything that could be called flawless. I picked out a few poems possibly to read to you. But one of the things which disturbed me also, and I'm sure I picked up on it, was that some poems in this book are printed in a different revision than what this editor chose. Now that came across recently in a video of a reading of something by William Butler Yeats, his poem about the brown penny, and I was shocked at the version that his complete poems used. It was just a really mediocre version of what he revised into a superb poem, I believe, unless it went the other way. But usually when Yeats revised things, he made things better. The discussion behind all of this seems reasonably thorough. So I probably should give my apologies to William Maxwell for all of the cursing under my breath that I have done in his name over the years, that I have lamented having sent this book back. But I'm glad to have it again. I really, given the place that McKay occupies in my life and in my oeuvre, it is only right that I have this in hand. So a good portion of the beginning of the book is devoted to his dialect poems, his poems in the Jamaican dialect. And I never found any of them very good. When I first had this book, I'm sure I read the whole thing through. But I'll give you a little sense of it. This one is titled Passive Resistance. There'll be no more rioting, stoning police and burning car, but we mean to gain our rights by a strong though bloodless war. We will show an alien trust that Jamaicans too can fight, and that while our blood is hot, they won't crush us with their might. Hawks may watch us as they like, but we do not care a pin. We will hold the boys in check. There'll be no more rioting. We are sorry, sorry much, for the worry given some, but it will not last for aye. Our victory day shall come. There are aliens in our midst who would slay us for our right. Yet though vipers block the way, we will rally to the fight. We'll keep up a bloodless war. We will pay the farthing's fare. And we send the challenge forth. Only touch us if you dare. So I think that captures very nicely the McKay fighting spirit. We need some of that today, absolutely, in our situation. If you want poetry in dialect in the English language, the best two writers are Robert Burns, the Scottish writer, and Paul Laurence Dunbar, a native-born American. They, in both cases, when they tried to write in so-called standard English, their poems fell flat. McKay, it was something of the opposite situation. It is his later poems, and particularly sonnets, of which this book is replete, that really shone forth and catapulted him into the ranks of our greatest American poets. I'll read you something else if I can get to the right page. Not even sure which one I picked here. I think this was kind of nice. This is titled The Hermit. Far in the country let me hide myself from life's sad pleasures and the greed of pelf. Dwellin' with nature, primitive and rude, livin' a peaceful life of solitude. There by the woodland let me build my home, where tropic roses ever are in bloom. And through the wild cane growing thick and tall, rushes in gleeful mood the waterfall. Roof strong enough to keep out season rain, under whose eaves loved swallows will be fain to build their nests and their young birdlings rear, withouten have the least lee taught of fear. And in my study I shall view the wool, and learn of all its doings to the full. List to the woodland creatures music sweet, sad yet contented in my lone retreat. Nobody, so far as I know, has read these in the Jamaican dialect. I should say, rather, just has read these as a Jamaican would read them in English. But whatever. I'm not going to parse the words here. Any of this stuff is too hard to figure out. But I think you can see there another aspect that I love in McKay. Throughout his writing career, he looked back to his boyhood in Jamaica. This is a real lovely one. It's called Hopping Off the Tram. It would not stop, so I took a hop, and lard o, my foot amiss, it sent me down, slam on the ground, and I had a dusty kiss. The car went long with its hummin' song, and I too went my way, but the sudden fall I did recall, and shall for many a day. sweet stuff there. Now, I'm not sure. I picked some of the later sonnets. I mean, a lot of the rest of the poems in this book are just really bad. Even from his later poems. He, after an initial spate in the early 1920s, say, he really devoted himself to prose writing, and he never gave up the poetry, but that was not where his main focus was. And a lot of what he produced was not very good. But this book contains verses from all periods, and all of it is good. So when one is a writer, one just, a poet particularly, one just has to take what is given, however it comes. I have no idea which one I picked here, but I'm going to guess it's this one. Circa 1943, it says, "Whichever way the whites may writhe and squirm, the fact remains that Negroes are suppressed, kept underfoot as far down as a worm. Jews under Nazis are not more unblessed. If Hitler ever gets Jews to their knees as abjectly as Negroes in these states, then baiting of the Jews at once will cease, for they'll be of all bereft without the gates. So expect me not a hypocrite to say some other people is worse off than mine, for facts remain in war and peace to flay the falsehoods from the propaganda line. If I tell the truth, it may not be in vain to bring another suffering group. It may bring gain." So, I mean, not exactly the best, but you can see the directness of expression, which is a hallmark of McKay's poetry. Must have been this one, also circa 1943. I haven't read the notes to all of these. "The American white man is so vastly vain and puffed up in conceit of pride and virtue, imagines that his victim in the main should thankful be when he has most crashly hurt you. He wants the Negro to soft soap his back with, 'Thank you, massa, you are very kind, after stretching me so taut upon the rack to leave some strength to scrub you down behind.' He thinks he is the paragon of creation, that God has destined for the world to rule, and every creature of every other nation should bow low down to him and be his footstool. And God, to justify his damnable case, he has many back scratchers of the Negro race." So, I mean, the prosody of this, the meter is much less secure than anything in this book. The poem, as I say, it's not that good. I plan to do a poetry reading entirely of McKay, and I will probably be drawing mostly upon poems from this book. So I don't want to put you off by this, but I think, once again, I think that the sentiment expressed is, it's like a shock of cold water into the face of the typical white man, isn't it? To read, "The American white man is so vastly vain and puffed up in conceit of pride and virtue." This is circa the mid-40s. I could not hate the German or the Jews, or Negroes love more than another race. God did not make me thus to pick and choose. Should Negroes help the whites to be more base? I hate not white men, but I hate their greed, their lives like thousands of congested maggots, which in the honey vats of life must feed, which dark men to make sweet must burn like faggots. Yet all of us are sinners in this world, and, O Lord, I have often wondered why I have been spared and not obscenely hurled down through hell's shafts of splintered glass to die, like many dust burned by war's blasting wind. Lord, I have sinned, 1,000 times have sinned. So that's, again, I would not call that one of his best poems, but that is a poem. I think it's one of the last ones in this book as well. Yeah, it's just a couple more after. A poem that really speaks directly to me. So I thought that I would share that with you. The presence of all these mediocre poems, which are definitely worth the study for other purposes, it doesn't shift McKay, in my estimation, one iota. I've mentioned, I think it was W.H. Auden said of that poem, Western Wind, if you can hit that pinnacle once in your life, you've accomplished everything. Western wind, when wilt thou blow? The small rain down can rain. Christ, if my love were in my arms and I in my bed again, or the small rain down shall rain. And so it's the poems here that endear McKay to me, and I will give a reading soon, I hope. I've been looking at all of my McKay stuff. I really think he is a good poet for our times. Most of my books, or a lot of my books of my poetry, will have something here or there that makes reference to Claude McKay. My very first did Embodiment and Release. I quoted something from one of his poems. This book, which is the first book that I wrote after the sonnets, I believe, I haven't found it, but I believe I have a poem in here. And it's just, when you write poetry, you have to be willing to go off into the realm of being goofy. And you have to write something even if it's stupid. And I said in a line somewhere that I felt that Claude McKay would, in fact, do I have a picture of Claude here somewhere? I think I do. Oh yeah, I have him on a cover. I have all my books pertaining to McKay out. There's Claude. I guess that this kind of shows you what he looked like too, and that was used on this book. There are other good photos of him, but I said something to the effect that I felt that Claude McKay would was a much better candidate for father of our country than that old slaveholder, George Washington. And even at the time I was writing it, and this book was written in 1996, I think. Yeah. I knew that would come off as kind of goofy. But with everything that has happened since, so 1996, so we're almost 30 years later, the way the course of events have run, now that we have the fascist regime of Donald Trump at the helm, all of our past is being called into question. And I know for myself at least that I would much rather live in a country that patterns itself after the high ideal of the figure of Claude McKay than that of George Washington. I understand George Washington had his virtuous aspects, okay? But given what the current regime is trying to do, how much of our shared culture it is trying to decimate, I think we definitely need to go back and revisit our foundational myths. My new book, Against Fascism, does a little bit of that to the extent that I am capable of it. But I am sure that this deliberate effort to drive us back into the past, 150 years into the past or whatever it is, before all of those amendments to the Constitution that occurred after the Civil War. This deliberate effort culturally cannot succeed, however much legally these various strictures can be forcibly imposed upon us. Culturally, the effort cannot succeed. Trump and his approved acolytes can take over the Kennedy Center, but people will simply stop going to the Kennedy Center. That is not what we want. I think having drag shows was an issue. Well, so I have not read this book. I've only read little bits of it. I'll read you something about this. Why was McKay concerned about locating Black artists through their work? He believed that African American writers should identify themselves with their works as a form of resistance to cultural genocide in the American society. An international debate is currently underway regarding strategies that can be used to gradually eliminate a group from a population which are not covered under the United Nations Convention on Genocide. Gender removal, miscegenation, and cultural genocide are not covered by the convention, while they are methods that architects of genocide have conceived to remove in whole or in part national, ethnical, racial, or religious groups from a population. My interjection here, we absolutely have a goal of ethnic cleansing being perpetrated in this country by this fascist regime. Julie Barak provides an explanation of cultural genocide, and then it quotes her. One of the weapons colonizers use to conquer the people they encounter as they invade and settle new territory is cultural genocide. In many colonial situations, native people have been divorced from their heritage, forced to abandon their language, and stripped of their traditions. These create a vacuum in the colonized people that is filled with the history, language, and traditions of the people who conquered them. In the United States, this was the government's policy. Through the power of repetition, the colonized began to believe the messages they are bombarded with. That was present tense. Through the power of repetition, the colonized begin to believe the messages they are bombarded with. They begin to respect and admire the culture of the colonizer and to denigrate their own culture. Then back to this author, Lloyd D. McCarthy. Consequently, it should be no surprise that it was on the cultural genocide battlefront that McKay would first appear. He, along with other politically and socially aware artists, helped to redefine and clarify the African culture in the America society. A cursory reading of McKay's novels and volumes of poetry, Home to Harlem, Banjo, Banana Bottom, and Songs of Jamaica, clearly tells his readers that the work that they are reviewing was not only written by a black man, but also by a proud peasant turned intellectual. His art is undeniably presented from the working class and peasantry's perspective, and not from a pseudo-aristocratic, petit bourgeois worldview. It was this characteristic in McKay's Home to Harlem that the black middle class, including W.E.B. Du Bois, detested the most. His literary works reminded them that they were just up from bondage. Yet it is this same characteristic that sets McKay's novels and poetry apart from the crowd of black intellectuals of his time. He was proud of his black Ashanti heritage, peasant upbringing, and close alliance with the African American working class. In fact, he declared himself a peasant poet. McKay's favorite poet was also the Russian peasant poet Sergei Yesenin. Furthermore, McKay knew that in Jamaican history, it was not the educated elites who led the massive resistance against slavery. Some of the mulattoes were, in fact, slave owners and profited immensely from the enslavement of their own mothers. So, a long way from home was McKay's autobiography, and I read this a long time ago. Can't remember much about it. I'm not particularly interested in the biographies of people. This edition has an introduction by St. Clair Drake, and he starts, Claude McKay came to this country from Jamaica in 1912, 4 years before Marcus Garvey, the organizer of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. He, like Garvey, had left the West Indies in search of wider opportunities for self-expression. Garvey's destiny led him toward a mass leadership role, then to imprisonment and deportation to Jamaica. Claude McKay eventually won international acclaim as a writer. Then came poverty, chronic illness, and finally his death, almost unnoticed. That reminds me of something in Max Eastman's biographical note. His last years were passed in sickness. He could not write much, and he was destitute. One word on the communist side would have brought him ease, comfort, contemporary fame, and a good income. But he would not speak it. He chose instead to live in penury and watch his fame and popularity gradually disappear from the earth. A few years more and he would have seen them rise again, for his choice was as correct as it was courageous, and his place in the world's literature is unique and is assured. Now this marvelous biographical summary does contain an unconscious condescension, as it was called by his biographer, Wayne Cooper. This is a marvelous book, and I don't know if I would urge you to this before reading the autobiography of McKay, but certainly it would not harm to read them in tandem. McKay is not exactly always upfront here. He does not, it is not a tell-all biography, and I think that we would like him to tell more. So he is reticent. I imagine this, so far as I know, is the first biography of McKay, and I just read somewhere that it is also the best still by somebody. I've also read this one, and I don't really recall that there's any great improvement of this over this, but this is marvelous. I just found it by chance in some used bookstore. Back in the day, you couldn't research things online prior to the internet, and you could not just order books here or there. Oh, and this insert is microfiche. Hundreds mourn Claude McKay, poet. I really, I knew that the, I think it was 50th anniversary of his death was coming, and I really had wanted to go and spend that time at his grave. He died in Chicago, and so I had hopes that his grave was in Chicago, but it was not. He is buried in New York somewhere. The time came and went, and I have never gone to see his grave. As with John Keats, I would have liked to have seen his grave, but when in Rome, I was traveling. When one is traveling, one has a travel companion who may not be inclined to taking a half day off to get to the cemetery. But I wonder if this has any good photos. I don't see any section of photos in here. That's too bad. McKay's life is definitely, it definitely adds to the poetry. Does this have photos? No good photos in here either. Too bad. So to complete the show and tell, I ordered this from the library, codename Sasha. I'll read a little bit from this. I didn't exactly pick. Claude McKay, codename Sasha. Queer Black Marxism and the Harlem Renaissance is intended to be useful to those working in a range of critical studies. As McKay is among the foremost new Negro movement authors, this work should interest those who study and read African American literature, and not only the writers of the Harlem Renaissance. No scholarship in African American studies has addressed the multi-layered queer Black Marxism in the new Negro author's writings. And I would hope that this study might assist in similar efforts to find common ground in habitually discrete critical spheres. I also hope that the book is of use to those interested in post-colonial and negritude studies, as it proposes new ways of approaching the notion of a Black diaspora literature. As no critical work has dealt with the way a Black modernist period author's notion of diaspora was linked to sexuality and leftist politics, this book is meant as well to satisfy a want in transnational studies. While touching on transnational and post-colonial studies, I hope that readers of Caribbean literature will find it helpful, particularly those interested in rereading Caribbean writers of the period between the world wars, as McKay is a key Jamaican author. My objective is also that the text will interest those studying 20th century transatlantic modernist writers and their literary yield, both poetry and prose. As the work recovers McKay as a radical leftist writer, the text should be of interest to those who are concerned with the history and historiography of the Old Left as well, but also ways in which an Old Left modernist period author assisted in articulating and challenging assumptions about New Left vocabularies of cultural inquiry. Finally, as the study re-examines his sexuality, I hope it is of use to those who are interested in queer writers, in gender studies and cultural studies, particularly those who are invested in rethinking ways in which race and leftist politics intersect with sexual dissidence. My principal aspiration, however, is to suggest that these allegedly discrete fields of critical taxonomy may find mutual ground in the study of Claude McKay. Claude McKay, codenamed Sasha, is meant to have a bearing on the new American studies concern with a post-nationalist critique and the employment of cultural studies. Consequently, I also hope that it will be useful to those working in North American studies. So this book, the first printing was in 2007. I've been aware of this book probably for at least a decade, maybe 15 years, I don't know. But I've never really been that interested, and I've not been a real devoted user of the public library because it's our library in Chicago has problems. But only in thinking of preparing myself for reading some Claude McKay poems, I thought, oh, I should get this book and see what it has to say. And I've been poking through it, but I don't know. My mind right now with the situation in my country is very unfocused, and I don't know that I can do a cover-to-cover reading of it as much as I might be interested in learning more about Claude McKay's bisexuality. A lot of this draws upon his novels, and I've never liked McKay's novels. I don't think I've read one of his novels all the way through. I think that, what is it? I have everything here somewhere, but I'm just not sure. Oh, I think Home to Harlem is the first, and I think there's well, something must tell me what his other titles are. Banjo was one. Banana Bottom. There's a book of short stories. Ginger Town. 2 autobiographical books, A Long Way from Home and My Green Hills of Jamaica. I don't think that in my time of really diving into McKay that My Green Hills of Jamaica was available anywhere. I should look now to see if it is and see what that is like. I'm not particularly interested in reading about his life at this time. I mean, I've moved on from poetry and all of that. But I have his most recently published novels. This was unpublished for, I don't know, 40 years or more. What does it say? Anyhow, this was unpublished for a long time. It existed, but there was no market for it. And there are some textual issues. It had to be edited. It looks pretty good. And just recently, this was published after being discovered. It was not even known that it existed, and it was found in a drawer somewhere. This is 2017, so it's still pretty young. And once again, I had to rush out and buy this as a brand new hard copy. Now you can get it for a couple of bucks, and I still haven't read it. That's kind of nice. I mean, it's a beautiful edition. And there he is. I don't know how well you can see that. I will look for that, but this is still on my docket. This is the next book by Claude McKay that I want to read. In this valuable study, one of the best-known writers of the Harlem Renaissance captures the character of the Negro capital of the world during the 1920s and 30s, its social hierarchy, its religions and cults, its business enterprises and rackets, its amusements, and its politics. He devotes chapters to the most influential leaders of this era, Marcus Garvey, whose Back to Africa movement made a phenomenal impact on Harlem and on blacks everywhere. Father Divine, God in Harlem, and his peace mission, which at its peak attracted tens of thousands of followers, and a dashingly dressed Muslim of sorts named Sufi Abdul Hamid, who started a movement to get more community jobs for blacks. McKay goes on to discuss the problems faced by black labor, and he concludes with a stinging analysis of international communism, its cynical exploitation of blacks, and its failure to serve their cause. So I do hope to get to this. And this is just something that I picked up somewhere that I've only glanced into here and there, and I don't know if I will get into it. I really need to figure out how to up my reading game, but given the circumstances under which we are living our lives today, I can't as yet figure out how to get the reading in. I went through a good week or more of solid reading on my Parkman, and that has kind of blown up again. That's right now still my main focus. And I'm going to try to get back to that. But right now, I'm whether it's a good thing or not, I'm focusing on the news in my country, and I don't I don't see any call to write another book of this sort, but nevertheless, I continue to think about what's going on and continue to think about what possibly I can do. It is not that things are not happening, that um, now I've done too many negatives. I'm not really clear. Sorry. It's not that things are happening. I mean, things are happening that could easily be written about in verse form, but I don't see at this point the value to that, especially the value to me. Um, and I do have to draw a line at some point, but I still want to focus on the present situation, particularly this rounding up of immigrants and others, including citizens, without due process, the shunting people off to prisons around the globe, the building of concentration camps in the United States, and so forth. That has to be where my focus lies, and I want to give a reading of some poems by Claude McKay, a great American poet. You will find him in any of the Library of America anthologies that cover the time period. I don't remember anymore if and when he became a naturalized citizen or any of that. Biographical information does not stick with me. But he is a man that the current powers that be in Washington certainly would like to have eradicated from our collective consciousness, and it will not happen. And when I read the poems, you will hear that he is one of the great American voices of his time. I think in many respects, the greatest voice that we have. You have Eliot, who kept looking back toward England. And while McKay was looking back to Jamaica, he was looking forward. And so he is a good voice to keep in mind. Why don't I read his most famous poem? A poem that's referred to many times in my own poetry. If I can find it. It should be the easiest thing to find, and now I can't. Here it is. I talked about that fighting spirit. We need some of this today, if we must die. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back. The murderous, cowardly pack of this regime. What I'm just looking up James Baldwin. I'm going to close out with some quotation from James Baldwin. This is The Soul's Refinement. Again, not a book that I'm recommending to you. This is the poem that I used it for is... and this is the one that I was thinking of. Well, I'm not going to read it to you. This is the one where Thou art in many ways a clearer symbol for Father of our country, of our spirit, of independent bent, so proud and humble, thy melody so fine, if more would hear it. A clearer symbol, Claude, of who we are, thou beacon of the night and shining star. So I guess I didn't make explicit that I was raising him above George Washington. Anyhow, in this book, I prefaced a lot of poems with quotations from other writers, and then getting the permissions was an ordeal. People are very covetous of their little paragraphs. Estates are. Authors themselves probably are not. So this is James Baldwin. The white man's unadmitted and apparently to him unspeakable private fears and longings are projected onto the Negro. The only way he can be released from the Negro's tyrannical power over him is to consent, in effect, to become black himself. The price of the liberation of the white people is the liberation of the blacks, the total liberation in the cities, in the towns, before the law, and in the mind. And then the other quotation from James Baldwin in this book is very different. White men have killed black men for refusing to say sir, but it was the corroboration of their worth and their power that they wanted, and not the corpse, still less the staining blood. Well, I would dispute that. What we have seen with MAGA today and with the followers of Donald Trump, yeah, they don't want the staining blood, but they do want the corpse. So that's where things stand today. Hopefully the reading of some poetry by Claude McKay will be forthcoming. Thank you for stopping by my channel.